Dartmoor, a wild, bleak and desolate place in the heart of Devon. Defined by its exposed granite tors, sweeping rain-soaked moorland and treacherous bogs, Dartmoor has a romantic appeal for many. This magical wilderness, with its rolling hills, gorges, rocky rivers and wooded valleys, is home to thousands of sheep, Dartmoor ponies and, it seems, numerous ghosts. But this is an unforgiving landscape. Its brutal, changeable weather can catch out even the most experienced hikers, and deaths on Dartmoor sadly happen. Today we'll look at the ghosts inside this sprawling national park, from haunted villages, castles and pubs to Civil War phantoms and even a haunted prison. Welcome to the Ghosts of Dartmoor. On the northeast edge of Dartmoor lies the historic market town of Chagford. The tin mining industry brought great prosperity to the area, and after its demise, the town became a centre for the wool industry and had several mills that produced cloth and other textiles. All of this brought affluent merchants to the town, who went on to construct many impressive buildings that are still in use today and are home to several interesting ghosts. In 1305, Edward I created the Stannary Charter, and Chagford became one of 4 stannary towns that had a monopoly on all tin mined in Devon. The word stannary is derived from the word stannum, which is Latin for tin. The tinners had to take their goods to one of these 4 towns to be weighed, quality assessed, stamped, and then a duty was levied on it that was payable to the Crown. The Devon stannary towns are all on the fringes of Dartmoor, which is the granite upland which bore the tin. The Anglican parish church of St. Michael the Archangel was dedicated in 1261, and this is Chagford's oldest building. It was originally a Roman Catholic church, although little remains from this period. A memorial to Mary Widden, dated the 11th of October 1641 or 1647, is found inside the church, and it is believed that the famous best-selling novel Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore was inspired by events that occurred at this very church. Mary was a direct descendant of John Widden, a wealthy local man who built the 3 Crowns Inn in Chagford. Tragically, just moments after Mary had married, she was shot dead by an ex-boyfriend at the church, either at the altar or on the steps. Her sad, weeping apparition in a 17th century wedding dress has been witnessed inside the church and grounds where she is buried. The epitaph on the memorial in the church states, "Mary Widden, daughter of Oliver Widden, who died in 1641. Reader, wouldst thou know who here is laid? Behold a matron, yet a maid. A modest look, a pious heart, a Mary for the better part. But dry thine eyes, why will thou weep? Such damsels do not die, but sleep." Her will bequeathed monies to her brothers and sisters, her godchildren, to the poor of Chagford and the labourers of the parish. She also left a gold ring to her mother, possibly her wedding ring, and apart from this, very little is known of Mary Widden. Mary's apparition also haunts nearby Widden Park, the remains of the 16th century mansion house of the Widden family. This was the seat of the Whiddon family from the mid-16th century until 1761. The building we see today, constructed from granite and slate, is thought to be a section of a much larger manor house. It was built under the orders of John Whiddon, the head of the family. In 1551, he was made King's Sergeant, and 2 years later, in 1553, Queen Mary I appointed him a Justice of the Queen's Bench. He was a respected and influential man of law, and this gave him great wealth. He built Whiddon Park as his prestigious country seat, where he could entertain and impress his guests, which is why he built his very own deer park, enclosed by huge granite walls. Today the property is not open to the public, but some of its former residents have shared some of their paranormal encounters. In the 1930s, Molly Duxbury, the wife of George Duxbury, who was the vicar of Bovey Tracy, lived at Whiddon Park before her marriage in 1940. When she and her family moved in, there were many occasions where heavy male footsteps ascended the staircase, despite the father of the family being absent. Sometimes at night, when the family were trying to sleep, the footsteps would march up, cross the landing, and stop just outside Molly's bedroom. Molly recalls on several occasions her mother shouting, "Is that you?" assuming this to be her husband, but there was never anybody there. On 3 successive nights, the family were in the lounge and heard distinct rapping on the kitchen window. The family had been told by a previous resident that this was the ghost of a drunk sailor, but there was no logical explanation for these events. Perhaps the strangest and most poignant incident took place in 1971. The daughter of the household was due to marry at Chagford Church. On the morning of the wedding, a family guest staying at the house awoke at dawn to see a young woman wearing a vintage wedding dress standing in the doorway. Although startled, he related this experience to the family, and they explained the story of how Mary Whiddon was murdered after her wedding. A story he did not know. After the wedding, the Western Morning News reported that the bride had placed her bouquet on Mary Whiddon's grave at Chagford Church. Whether this has placated the apparition of Mary at Whiddon Park remains a mystery. The Three Crowns operates as a charming pub and hotel, but this is a building with a violent past. It was built in the 1550s as a townhouse for the Whiddon family, who remained here until their decline in the late 17th century. This beautiful pub boasts granite walls, iron-barred windows, oak beams, and a roaring open fire. The Victorian writer Charles Kingsley described it as a beautiful old mullioned perpendicular inn. 2 apparitions are said to haunt this charming inn. The first is the ghost of Mary Whiddon. After she was shot, Mary was brought here, and this is where she ultimately expired. Her apparition, again wearing her wedding dress, has been seen in the bishop's room and the upstairs corridors. The second is the ghost of Sidney Godolphin, who has been witnessed on many occasions. His story dates back to the turmoil of the Civil War. Sidney Godolphin was born in January 1610, and he was a poet and courtier from Cornwall who sat in the House of Commons from 1628 to 1643. He was born at Godolphin House near Helston in Cornwall. The Godolphin family were both powerful and wealthy, having made a fortune from the Cornish tin mines. As the head of the family, Sidney Godolphin was one of the most influential men in Cornwall. He served in the Royalist Army, during the First English Civil War. In February 1643, Sidney Godolphin and a group of Royalist soldiers stayed at Chagford for just one night. Rumours quickly spread to the parliamentarians that enemy soldiers were in town. As the Cavaliers prepared to leave and journey on, they were ambushed by a group of Roundheads, and an impromptu battle began. Godolphin, regarded as a gentle and amiable man, was shot by a musket during this skirmish, some say above the knee, some say in the buttocks, and quickly bled to death on a stone bench in the porch of the Three Crowns. He was taken into the building before burial 2 days later in the chancel of All Saints' Church in Oakhampton on the 10th of February 1643. His apparition, magnificent in his full Cavalier uniform and sporting a handsome plumed hat, appears at the inn from time to time. Occasionally he is seen in the porch where he died from his fatal injury. Sometimes he startles witnesses by suddenly manifesting in front of them, looking at them with a sad stare. He has been seen throughout this magnificent building in various rooms and corridors, and has been seen walking through the thick granite walls. Sometimes he is blamed for heavy pacing footsteps, but he is generally regarded as a friendly ghost. Many years ago, a professional photographer named Mr. Hamilton Fisher was taking photographs in the lounge for the hotel's brochure. This was in the day of analogue photography, and he was baffled as to why he was having such trouble with his camera. As soon as he started to include the nearby portrait of Godolphin, the camera began to work. Dartmoor is home to an impressive number of stone circles and rows. These mysterious monuments are believed to be sacred ceremonial, ritual and burial sites that give clues about how people lived in times gone by. There are 17 stone circles in Devon, and 15 of these are on Dartmoor. Not only do they hold spiritual significance, but some are said to be haunted. Just outside the village of Gidley, high up on the moor, stands Scorhill, one of Devon's finest stone circles. The circle was constructed in the Bronze Age and is approximately 27 metres in diameter. There are currently 34 stones, and these unshaped granite blocks almost seem as if they have somehow been pushed up through the earth. In the northwest of the circle stands the tallest stone, at nearly 2.5 metres, with its distinctive jagged point. It has been observed that when viewed from the centre of the circle, the sun sets over the stone's tip on Midsummer's Eve, indicating some purpose in archaeoastronomy. There are local stories of Dartmoor ponies and herds of cattle refusing to pass through the stone circle. In 1998, a small herd of moorland ponies were observed walking up to the circle. The dominant pony entered the ring of stones and stood still for about a minute. It then rejoined the rest of the group. One by one, all the ponies did the same thing. Went into the circle, stood there for 30 to 60 seconds, and then came out. Whilst in the stone circle, each pony faced the same direction. What might cause this rather unusual equine behaviour? For hundreds of years, the site has been visited by the beautiful Grey Lady of Gidley, the apparition of a young woman wearing a grey hooded cloak, who walks with her head bowed from the River Tean towards the stone circle at Scorhill. She stands still, her arms outstretched, close to the largest stone, and looks up to the sky before fading away. This elusive apparition is thought to be linked to a ritual at the stone circle that the women of Chagford, accused of unfaithfulness or promiscuity, were forced to take part in. The accused women were made to endure a humiliating ordeal in front of onlookers, which began with bathing, unclothed, in Cranmere Pool close to Oakhampton. Then, wearing just a coarse shirt, they were paraded on foot to the North River Tean, close to the stone circle, to bathe again. And finally, they were taken to the stone circle, where they had to kneel at the base of an upright stone and beg for forgiveness. If nothing happened, the young lady was deemed to be either innocent or forgiven for her actions, and had to be taken back into the arms of her husband. Occasionally, the mighty stones would topple and crush the unfortunate woman in front of the crowd, and this was seen as a symbol of her guilt. Today, 11 fallen stones remain in the circle. Does this mean this humiliating and barbaric punishment has indeed occurred over time? But the lady in grey is believed to be one of the accused, guilty or not, who decided to drown in the river rather than endure this terrible public ordeal. Others believe she is a traveller who got lost on the moor whilst trying to escape an unhappy relationship. Maybe she sees the stone circle as a safe place of solitude and even protection. Perhaps we will never know. Princetown is a village 1,400 feet above sea level in the centre of Dartmoor National Park. The 2021 census listed the village's population as just shy of 1,500, but this small settlement is dominated by His Majesty's Prison, Dartmoor. This imposing granite structure is deliberately remote, and the foundation stone was laid on the 20th of March 1806. In Victorian times, Dartmoor Prison was believed to be the hardest and most severe in all of England. Nicknamed the Hated Cage, Dartmoor was meant to crush the prisoners, both physically and mentally. It is not a surprise that Dartmoor, a place of squalor and despair, is said to be haunted. From 1803 to 1815, Britain was at war with Napoleonic France, and many thousands of prisoners were taken. In order to accommodate them, redundant warships were utilised as floating prisons, known as the hulks, and several were at anchor in Plymouth Sound. Conditions were so bad, with poor sanitary arrangements, little exercise, lack of fresh air, and a restricted diet, that the death rate quickly rose to an unacceptable level. A prison on land, remote and expansive, was deemed to be the solution. Princetown on Dartmoor was considered a suitable location, and that is how Dartmoor Prison came to be built. But Dartmoor Prison was not without its problems. The first prisoners arrived on the 22nd of May 1809, and the prison was full by the end of the year. In April 1813, American prisoners began arriving, and the overcrowding became worse. On the 3rd of April 1813, a party of 250 American prisoners of war arrived at Princetown, predominantly sailors who had been captured during the Anglo-American War. They arrived on the hulk ship Hector, which was moored in Plymouth, before making the 17-mile trek through rain and snow to Princetown. Outbreaks of disease such as pneumonia, typhoid and smallpox killed more than 11,000 French prisoners and 271 Americans. They were hastily buried, without ceremony, in a field behind the prison. Inside the wings, visitors and staff have reported hearing cries, footsteps, and seeing shadowy figures wandering the prison's dark corridors. Stories of apparitions dressed in prisoner uniforms and cold spots add to the prison's haunted reputation. The prison is also said to be haunted by those unfortunate French and American prisoners of war who suffered such harsh conditions and met tragic fates. No wonder their restless spirits still roam. While some inmates believe that the jackdaws which fly around the area contain the souls of dead staff. In 1920, the prison began housing UK criminals. It developed a reputation for incarcerating some of Britain's most serious offenders that included murderers, gangsters, spies and robbers such as Jack the Hat McVitie, a henchman for the Cray twins, who failed to carry out the contract murder of their business manager, Leslie Payne. McVitie was subsequently murdered by Reggie Cray in 1967. London gangster Jack Spot Comer was also held here, as well as the serial killer John George Haigh. He was known as the acid bath murderer and was convicted for the murder of 6 people, although he claimed to have killed 9. Despite being ringed by high stone walls and manned by hundreds of armed militia sentries, prisoners made numerous attempts to escape onto the moors, leading to massive manhunts by the police and prison service. The apparitions of prison dogs that still patrol former inmate routes are seen and heard on Dartmoor to this day. Although Dartmoor is said to be home to several spectral beasts, including the Yethhound. These phantom dogs are said to roam the moors at night and are considered harbingers of doom. Hearing their howling or encountering them is believed to bring bad luck or even death. Some say the Yethhounds are headless and are formed by the spirit of an unbaptised child. They roam through the woods at night, making wailing noises, and are sometimes seen near ancient crosses during storms. These large, jet-black, spectral hunters, who emerge in packs led by the devil, chase the lost souls of unbaptised children and lure lone walkers to their deaths in the mires and bogs across Dartmoor. The most famous apparition connected to Dartmoor Prison and the surrounding land is that of David Davis, whose nickname was the Dartmoor Shepherd and who died in Wales in 1929. David Davis was a regular inmate at the prison in the late part of the 19th century and early 20th, but in his lifetime he not only gained local notoriety, but came to the attention of 2 prominent politicians. He was born in mid-Wales in 1849 and after school managed to work as an agricultural labourer. Times were tough and he quickly became a petty criminal, stealing church poor boxes and committing burglary. His first recorded crime was in 1870 when he received a sentence of 1 month's hard labour at Montgomery Jail for stealing a shirt. Shortly after his release, he was in hot water once more, this time for stealing a gun. On the 2nd of August 1870, he was sent to Ruthin Jail for 8 months' hard labour. His first long sentence came in 1871, when he was sentenced to 7 years at Manchester Assizes for burglary. He had broken into a home in Oldham and stolen a bottle of champagne, which he consumed. Davis would commit crimes across the country and would use a number of false names. Out of a life of 80 years, he spent 55 in prison. In 1886, he was caught stealing clothes from Hardwick Hall, Shropshire, and was sentenced at Shrewsbury to 15 years at Dartmoor Prison. His natural flair for agricultural work was utilised, and he worked on the prison farm. He was employed as the prison's shepherd and was given permission to wander freely about the moor, attending to his flock. His time at Dartmoor lasted 12 years, and in 1899 he was released. But in 1899 he appeared before magistrates at Liverpool, charged with stealing 4p from a charity box at St Mary's Catholic Church in Warrington. He was sent back to Dartmoor to serve out the remainder of his previous sentence, with the addition of 1 extra month for the crime in Warrington. This pattern continued for many years, and in 1902 he was back reunited with his sheep. It is around this time that he was quoted as saying, "Look after them, I'll be back soon," whilst awaiting his release. In 1909, Davies broke into the offertory box in Whitchurch, Shropshire, in which 2 marked 6p pieces had been placed. He appeared at Shrewsbury charged with theft. Given that he was identified as a habitual criminal, he was sentenced to 3 years penal servitude and 10 years preventative detention. He returned to Dartmoor and to his beloved sheep. Davies never committed any acts of violence, and at this time he appealed to the Home Secretary, Winston Churchill, about the harshness of his sentence. He was described by Churchill as having an incurable mania for theft. This brought both Winston Churchill and David Lloyd George, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, to Dartmoor, and the decision was made to release Davies on licence, with employment being found for him at a farm near Ruthin in North Wales. Despite this act of clemency, Davies abused the trust and conditions of the work placement and absconded from the farm 2 days after his arrival in January 1911. Unsurprisingly, Davies received numerous short sentences for stealing offertory boxes in places such as Whitby, Warrington, Matlock, and his usual haunts around Shrewsbury. This time he was sent to Llanfyllin workhouse, not prison. He found employment at a nearby farm, but the lure of the church boxes was irresistible. In April 1929 he absconded from the workhouse, but he was discovered dead on the roadside, about 3 miles away, with heart failure from exhaustion as the cause of death. Local residents had taken pity on the dead man, and following a collection, Davies's body was taken by farm cart for burial in the nearby Llanfyllin churchyard, and thus he avoided a pauper's grave. Since his death, the ghost of Davies, wearing his distinctive waistcoat and hat, has been seen within the corridors of the prison and its grounds, but more frequently on the moor itself. He is seen herding a ghostly flock of sheep, using a shepherd's crook, and is sometimes heard calling and directing them. He sometimes appears in broad daylight, but it is said that as soon as he is spotted, he vanishes. Despite committing crimes against the church, where the symbol of the Good Shepherd is so important, Davies was dedicated to his flock in all weathers and truly cared for them, keeping them from ever-present threats of danger on Dartmoor. For a man who spent so much of his life in prison, perhaps this is his idea of everlasting freedom, to be with his flock, roaming the mist-swept moor, an area he knew so well in life. The beautiful village of Lydford sits on the western fringe of Dartmoor National Park. Close by is the impressive Lydford Gorge, noted for its spectacular scenic walks and wildlife. However, Lydford, despite its small size and charming appearance, has several haunted locations. After the siege and capture of Exeter by William the Conqueror in 1068, the Normans built castles at strategic sites and towns. At Lydford they built a small ringwork in about 1087, which was abandoned by the middle of the 12th century. In 1194, King John approved the building of a new tower, east of the church, to house offenders against both the forest and stannery laws. The castle included a stone tower which was modified and rebuilt over the years, and a bailey protected by deep ditches and ramparts. Although King John garrisoned the castle at one time, it was more of an administrative centre, courtroom and prison, which over time gained a reputation for its harsh sentences and poor, grim conditions. Offenders against the stannery laws continued to be imprisoned at the castle throughout the Middle Ages and fitfully until the 18th century. The best known was Richard Strode, MP for Plymouth, himself a tinner, who was thrown in the jail in 1510 after having the audacity to complain that mining debris in the moorland rivers was silting up the harbour at Plymouth. He later described the prison at Lydford as one of the most annoyous, contagious and detestable places within this realm. By 1650, Lydford Castle was described as very much in decay, with collapsed floors and only the roof intact. During the English Civil War, Lydford Castle was used by the Royalists for Sir Richard Grenville's military prisoners and as an ammunition store. Some repairs were carried out in 1716 and 1733, but by the early 19th century, the castle was in near ruin. But the Stannery Court's sinister reputation for rough justice was long remembered. William Browne, the Tavistock poet, wrote these often quoted lines. I oft have heard of Lydford law, how in the morn they hang and draw, and sit in judgment after. At first I wondered at it much, but since I found the matter such, that it deserves no laughter. Even today, as visitors stand inside the roofless tower and look upwards at the massively thick walls, they get the vivid impression of what a fearsome and intimidating place this must have been. Prisoners were dropped to the ground through a trapdoor at the top of this staircase, causing significant injury to many. The grim remains of Lydford Castle still hold an atmosphere of intense cold and despair, and this is where you may encounter a devil-like creature with glaring red eyes who drives away or possesses anyone foolish enough to venture into the ruins at night. Over the centuries, tales of black magic being practiced on this site have added to the castle's sinister reputation. You may also encounter the man in chains, who has been seen but more often heard by a number of visitors. He is said to be a prisoner who met his end within the castle's walls when he was brutally murdered by another inmate. His rattling chains and mournful cries reverberate through the ruins, particularly at night. His presence is often heralded by unexplained cold spots and sudden drops in temperature. The castle grounds are said to be haunted by the beautiful apparition of a young woman wearing a long white dress. Local legend says she was accused of witchcraft and executed at the castle, despite her innocence. She was buried at a crossroads in unconsecrated ground, and her restless spirit is reported to roam the area, sometimes appearing to visitors as a pale, misty figure, even in broad daylight. Next to the castle stands the rather quaint and far more inviting pub, the Castle Inn at Lydford. It was built in 1550, and this beloved pub is said to be home to 2 ghosts. It was used as a film location for an adaptation of Conan Doyle's The Hounds of the Baskervilles. The pub contains a Norman fireplace taken from the ruins of Lydford Castle next door. The apparition of a quiet gentleman smoking a pipe has been spotted sitting in the corner of the bar by some visitors. He was witnessed on 2 consecutive mornings at breakfast by a London taxi driver who was with a group of friends. On the 3rd morning, the gentleman wasn't present, and the guest asked one of the members of staff in passing as to the whereabouts of the quiet man with the pipe who had been sitting opposite. When asked if this man was a guest, the staff said that no such person was present in the bar on the previous days, and none of his friends had seen this figure either. Only some guests, it seems, are able to see this ghost. After this encounter, the taxi driver hurriedly packed his bags and left in fear. The ghost of a former castle jailer has been seen here, as this would have been his home. He is usually seen upstairs in and around room 6, where he paces loudly across the floor with heavy, echoing footsteps. Described as broad and muscular, he wears a dark uniform and has an intimidating presence. A shifting white mist has also been experienced too, and this is occasionally captured in photographs, much to the surprise of the photographer, who did not see it at the time. A short distance from both the castle and the pub is the Lydford Gorge, which is managed by the National Trust. Their literature states, this steep-sided river gorge, carved into the western edge of Dartmoor, has been drawing visitors in search of the picturesque waterfall since Victorian times. Around every corner, the River Lyd plunges, tumbles, swirls and gently meanders as it travels through ancient oak woodland, abundant with wildlife. This is the deepest river gorge in the southwest, and is filled with temperate rainforest, a recognised globally rare habitat. The River Lyd cuts its way through the ancient rocks, sometimes flowing peacefully, other times rushing loudly, as it does at Devil's Cauldron, a large pothole filled with gushing water and surrounded by rock walls. Here the water appears to boil, and it's this action, along with the tremendous force of the water, that created this dramatic structure over the centuries. During the 17th century, Lydford Gorge was considered a dangerous place, as it was the hideout of a large family of outlaws, known as the Gubbins, who terrorised the neighbourhood and stole sheep from the farms of Dartmoor. But if you're lucky, or maybe unlucky, at Lydford Gorge you might encounter 2 different ghosts. The route takes you to the tallest waterfall in Dartmoor, at 30 metres and known as the White Lady. Some say it is named after the ghost who is said to haunt this part of the gorge. According to those who have seen her, the ghost of the woman in white is witnessed with long, flowing hair, standing amid or next to the beautiful cascading vale of the waterfall. She is regarded by many as a symbol of good luck. Should you be unfortunate enough to fall into the river, the current can quickly become deadly, especially after heavy rainfall. But if you see the White Lady, she will help you and rescue you from the dangerous River Lyd. Some believe seeing her is a sign that your death is imminent. A 19th century writer, John Lloyd Warden Page, urged caution and warned readers to keep clear of her embrace, rather than to test the theory. There's a more sinister haunting, a replay of dark and disturbing acts from Lydford Gorge's brutal history. Some walkers hear loud, terrifying screams before witnessing the ghastly replay of human bodies of men, women and children who had been incarcerated and tortured at Lydford Castle centuries ago, being thrown to their deaths from the giddy heights of the gorge. As the icy black water of the River Lyd consumes them, all of their cries of anguish suddenly cease. Then there is the sad apparition of a woman wearing a red kerchief who haunts Kitty's steps, where the River Lyd tumbles over a waterfall before entering the Lydford Gorge. Historically, this was a well-known crossing place on the River Lyd. This is an area of danger. The damp, moss-covered slate-grey rocks were treacherous underfoot and, coupled with the dark waters of the river, claimed the lives of many people. In the 17th century, a woman named Catherine, or Kitty as she was known locally, was returning from Oakhampton Market, where she had been to sell her produce. On her return trip, her route took her to the falls. Heavy rain had made the river swollen. When she failed to arrive home, along with her horse, her family set out to search for her, without success. The following day, neighbours and friends of the family also joined the search. It was 7 days later that her red kerchief and wicker basket were discovered close to the crossing point. Kitty's body was never recovered, and nobody knows the fate of the horse. It is said that every year, on the anniversary of her death, the apparition of Kitty appears here, wearing her red kerchief and holding her wicker basket, gazing mournfully into the river. It seems the quiet village of Lydford, with its historic castle, pub and gorge, is still home to a number of spectral guests. I hope you enjoyed these ghost stories from the magnificent, rugged landscape of Dartmoor. It is a place I have visited many times, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with stories inspired by Dartmoor, such as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles, and I don't know if you know the Agatha Christie story The Sitterford Mystery, which is set in a tiny village on Dartmoor. Both have elements of the supernatural in them. The Sitterford Mystery even begins with a séance, and both involve escaped criminals from Dartmoor Prison, and you can find the audiobook versions of both of those on YouTube. So today I have some more ghost stories for you, some postcards, and I'm going to share a slightly odd encounter I had, which is also a bit embarrassing, on my birthday in Dartmoor in Princetown. I was not in the prison, incidentally. Before I continue, you may be wondering why I didn't include the hairy hands of Dartmoor or Jay's grave, and it's simply because I think they've been covered so many times before. I just like to try and delve into some of the more obscure stories, really, so that's why they are absent. I thought we'd have a look at another haunted pub, and this is the Globe pub in Chagford, and it seems to be haunted by a somewhat mischievous presence. There's been an inn on this site in various guises for about 400 years, but this current building dates back to the mid-19th century. And the Globe is said to be haunted by a 17th century chambermaid named Alice, and she was known as a cunning woman and was said to have healing powers. Unfortunately, a local resident who Alice treated died shortly after. I don't know what the treatment was, and it seems Alice was blamed for the fatality. So she was accused of being a witch, tied to a chair and lowered into the River Tean, and this caused Alice to drown, suggesting to the people at that time that she was innocent. So upstairs, the rooms are named after various flowers, and Alice haunts the azalea room, which overlooks the church. So that's the church where Mary Whiddon was shot. The manifestations are nearly always connected to water. People find their taps are running, the water pipes break, and mysterious wet towels are discovered in the bathroom. And nobody knows very much about this strange female presence. However, on a cold winter's morning, a guest staying at the Globe discovered unexplainable, strange writing on the frost-covered window pane. Most of it was illegible, but one word was clear: Alice. I thought that was really interesting about the water. I suppose she died in water, and lots of people believe that water is a conduit for paranormal activity, as is stone. in a way, and that is why I think some people believe or feel that Dartmoor is so haunted, because you've got lots of stone and lots of water. Let's go back to Dartmoor Prison for a moment. If you've ever seen Dartmoor Prison, it really is truly terrifying. It is just like something from a Charles Dickens novel. It is still a working prison, but all the prisoners have been moved because they found dangerous radon gas and they have to make it safe again. But I do believe they intend to use it again in the future. One of the escapees from Dartmoor I found interesting was a man named Peter Hammond, who was originally from Sweden. He was a sailor and he was held prisoner during the Napoleonic Wars, but during a riot he managed to escape. He made it to sea and went over to New Orleans, and then he bought a cheap bit of land about 45 miles north of New Orleans, grew trees to make masts and charcoal for the shipping industry, and built a homestead there. And in effect, this was the beginning of the city of Hammond in Louisiana. And this tree apparently marks his grave. I thought we'd have a look at a story connected with a coffin stone on Dartmoor. Between the mid-13th and the early 20th centuries, the bodies of all the deceased people in the Hexworthy and Dartmeet areas were physically carried to Widdicombe for burial in the churchyard. On leaving Dartmeet, the pallbearers would immediately have to climb the very steep Dartmeet Hill on Yartor Down. The path the pallbearers would take was known as a corpse road, and this would be a really laborious task, and along the path would be large rocks known as coffin stones. The coffin stone was a convenient place to rest the coffin, while the pallbearers took a break to regain their energy for the next part of the journey. Sometimes the pallbearers would have some whiskey and refreshments while taking their break. And if the deceased was a likeable person in life, they would carve the initials into the rock. This coffin stone was once a single rock, but the story is that many years ago a truly evil man had died and was being carried in his coffin for burial at Widdicombe Church. During the steep climb up Dartmeet Hill, his coffin was laid on the stone, and the men took a break. And it is said that at this moment, a massive thunderbolt struck the coffin and the stone. Not only was the coffin destroyed along with the body inside it, but the stone was split in two as well. And the men interpreted this to be a sign from the Almighty, who was not going to allow such an evil man to be buried in his holy cemetery. So without a corpse to bury, they drank more whiskey and then hurried off home in order to celebrate. Okay, here's my story from long ago. At this time, I was living and working in Plymouth. It was not that long after I'd finished university, and a lot of my friends were quite outdoorsy and would spend time on Dartmoor camping, fishing, walking and all of that. Me, not so much. I was much happier to be in the city, to be honest. Anyhow, we finished work. It was a Friday night and it was my birthday. And we were going to Princetown to a pub called the Plume of Feathers, or as we used to call it, the Plume of Doom, only because it was just down the road from Dartmoor Prison. And this was a place we'd been to quite a few times. We had a table booked for 8 people, 6 of us travelled up from Plymouth, and 2 friends had already come down from Bristol when we arrived. And it's really not that far from Plymouth by car. My friend Vicky had booked the bunkhouse just for us, just for the 8 of us, which was really basic accommodation with bunk beds. And they have a few bunkhouses, and I think if you're trekking across Dartmoor, it's a sort of place where a weary traveller can get some sleep and have a shower. All my friends had those proper mummy-style sleeping bags, and I had to go out and buy a sleeping bag for this excursion. And we put all our sleeping bags in there, dropped off all our bags, and we headed around to the front of the building, which is where the entrance to the pub is. My friends from Bristol had already put helium balloons on some of the chairs, which was kind. So we're just having a meal and a catch-up, and as the evening progressed, we noticed through the window that it had actually started to snow. And I was quite surprised by this, as it was April, which is relatively late for snow in the UK, and there was no mention of snow in the forecast. But this is Dartmoor. It's like a land of its own, basically. We didn't think much of it and carried on enjoying ourselves. And the evening went on and the regulars left and the landlord called time, and we were the last to leave because we were staying the night in the bunkhouse. But when we opened the front door of the pub, there was a good 3 or 4 inches of snow, and I think a lot of it had drifted up with the wind, and I just thought, oh no. And in order to get back to the bunkhouse, you had to physically walk around the pub. And my friends all had sensible walking shoes on, and this is so embarrassing. I was wearing a blouse, trousers, and really quite high heels because it was my birthday, I thought I'd dress up. And I just thought, how on earth am I going to walk in these shoes in this snow? This is awful. My friends were in stitches and started walking off. And I was just standing in the doorway, stranded, and I shouted to one of them to go back to the bunkhouse and get my trainers. It was just so ridiculous. Eventually, my friend Josh, who's a really tall chap, turned around, came back, and I don't know how he did it. He just bent down and picked me up in a proper fireman's lift. And when I say a proper fireman's lift, my head is facing right down, as in there's no way I'm going to get out of this hold. It was so embarrassing. It was so unladylike. I will never forget it. And after a large meal and a few drinks, being carried like this was a combination of fear and hilarity, I suppose, and I must have just looked ridiculous with my heels pointing out, and I was still holding my helium balloons. And I was really worried that Josh was going to slip and drop me because it was so slippery underfoot. Anyhow, we did make it back to the bunkhouse, but being in that position upside down, it felt like an eternity, to be honest. But when we got back to the bunkhouse, we were all in bits. It was very funny. So we got into the bunkhouse, switched the lights on, and there was a random man on my mattress on my bunk, and he was completely fast asleep. We didn't know who he was at all. One of my friends woke him up, and he looked all a bit dazed and confused, but he'd simply gone into the wrong bunkhouse, and it wasn't a problem. So he collected together all his belongings, and as he got up, he saw me, and he looked me up and down with my balloons, and as though to say, "You do realise you're on Dartmoor?" And I just said, "It's my birthday." And off he went. So we all got into our sleeping bags, locked the door, and switched off the light because we were all pretty tired, to be honest. And then within about half an hour, we heard this really strange scratching noise coming from outside of the bunkhouse. And it wasn't scratching like fingernails on a surface. This was way more deliberate, I suppose. Somebody put the light on and it stopped. And I thought, oh, it's just one of my friends messing about. And then it started again. The noise began again. And this time it was coming from the door. And it was really unmistakable. It was gone midnight and it was really quite a scary sound, actually. You do hear stories on Dartmoor of escaped prisoners trying to break into people's homes and outhouses and all of that. So I was a little bit on edge. And this sound was unmistakable. We all heard it, and the only way I can describe it is it sounded like somebody was outside our door, writing their name, but using a screwdriver as a pen. It sounded that harsh on the door. And nobody was brave enough to go and see what was going on, but we all nominated Josh. So he got up and he unlocked the door and just stood next to the door. Nothing. The noise stopped straight away. No noise. All was silent. And we were all silent too. And then it began again. The scratching started again. And Josh gave it a few seconds and then he flung the door open and there was absolutely nothing. Nobody there. Absolutely nothing to see. And to this day, I really have no idea what that was. And there could well be some sort of logical explanation. We couldn't work it out between us. And the following day, we were just completely baffled. None of us slept properly that night. And it was a truly scary encounter. And after that, I never went back to the plume of feathers or the plume of doom ever again. It was just very strange. Interestingly, it was only when I was making this video that I read an article about the plume of feathers supposedly being haunted. I'd never heard anything about that before. And apparently in the main building, one of the proper rooms on the first floor, people feel somebody or something pulling the sheets off them. And I think that's even worse because it's in the room with you. And people have also heard pacing footsteps, and they are said to be those of a poor woman whose child passed away shortly after the pub was built in 1785. And apparently she's been seen on the first floor wearing a brown cloak. Now, I've never been up into the main part of the pub, so I've got no idea. But whether or not any of these stories link to what happened to us in the bunkhouse, I just don't know. It was all very odd. And I just have 2 postcards for you today. The first one is dated July 1920, and it says, "We have just left prison on ticket of leave. 'Tis nice to be free, George." Now, I looked up the address, 110 Church Street, Brighton, and on the census there is a person called George in the 1922 census, I think it was, and he was a newsagent owner and a tobacconist. I wonder what he was in for. And then I've just got this last postcard from Lydford Gorge, and you can see really how deep the water is there and how it could really sweep somebody away. The National Trust have signs up everywhere saying, please do not swim in this water. It's very dangerous. It's very cold. And, they really do try and push people not to go into that water. And this postcard is from 1984 and was sent to SB Data Graphics. Keyboard department, having a nice break from work. Nice not to have to get up in the morning. Weather is really great. Hope it lasts, David. I think that's a really sweet postcard, and I love the fact that this postcard is being sent from one haunted location to Colchester, which is another haunted location. So that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please feel free to like and subscribe. Don't forget to come and find me on Instagram, and I'll say take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.